Well, you'll be pleased to know we're going to handbrake out of the drama, and we're going to leave the politics behind, and we're going to talk about the building. So
it never ends, but yes.
But the drama has ended for tonight. Anyway, our conversation, no more drama. So answer me this then, Yves. In your own words, tell me, what is the Network Foundation's mission, purpose, and objective, in particularly over the next 12 months? Well, what's its major ambition and major objectives?
So the overall mission is very simple. It's to enable developers, businesses, and individuals to build on EOS. It's as simple as that. And it does so by leveraging the financial means that it has access to, as well as the non-financial means that it has access to, in order to be able to make that mission come to life. One of the things that we've seen over the last 2 months or so has been the working groups. There will be more working groups that are in the mix. And
what
so,
are the working groups?
So right now we've got Audit Plus, we've got Core Plus, we've got API Plus, as well as Wallet Plus. Now we've just released the EVM Plus, which is the 5th one, which we had been working on now for a while. We were doing interviews with various teams that wanted to pitch for it, as well as we reached out to certain teams and asked them if they wanted to essentially apply to take on that role. But we will have other working groups. So there's a few, and this is exclusive knowledge. Nobody knows about this. I've only shared this with very few people. I'm not even sure if Zach knows this, because I'm not sure. These are really new. I'm working on Recover Plus, on Gov Plus, and then there's one that's been working on with multiple chains, which is the EOS.io Plus. And so this concept of the working groups is something that we've really taken to heart. It's something that I came up with, and ultimately through iterations and through working with the people that were selected to lead these projects, we've refined what that means, ultimately leading to the idea of a blue paper, which I also coined, which was basically just trying to find the next color in line after white and yellow. And the idea is that we're going to see more of these working groups coming about, which is really the network selecting individuals, teams that have showcased that they've got a particular skill set, a particular expertise, that they're subject matter experts in something, that they've showcased that they're capable of doing that something. Essentially, they've done a job interview for the last 3 years. So all of the teams that you've already seen that are in those working groups, they're teams that everybody knows. They're teams that have got projects that you use, projects that you're probably using on a daily basis or that you've used. And so it's putting those people together for the first time in EOS's history to think, to take a step back and to do some research on a particular field, looking at other blockchains, looking at other projects, and really looking at what we've been doing and where we should go next within that particular realm. We've never had that luxury before to be compensated, to be able to think of what we should do, why we should do it, how we should do it, what we shouldn't be doing, why we shouldn't be doing it, what other people are doing, what worked, what failed, how can we adapt it to ours, what kind of partnerships we can do. We've never had that luxury before. And that's something that I think is really important, because it gives us that background, constant iteration of thought process as to where we should go and why we should go there, instead of historically, frantically doing something, being very reactive based on what's going on and not being proactive far in advance, so that we can not have to react, so that we can save resources, so that we can invest in advance, so that we know where we're going. And then very importantly, that we publish where we're going so that people know where we're going. EOS has not had any kind of roadmap since the white paper. The white paper was essentially the roadmap that got everybody together, that brought people to EOS to say, this is where EOS is going. Since that happened, since the token sale, we have not been able to tell developers where we're going. We've not been able to tell investors where we're going, community members. We've not had anything come from an official source where a lot of work has gone and thought has gone into where we should go, why we should go, how we're going to get there, who's funding this, how much it's going to cost, what are the other options. That will all be published. And the idea behind that is that the more people know where the vision is, they see where we're going, the better they can see how they fit in that picture. And then simultaneously, while we're releasing that vision, we're also creating the mechanisms for people to see where they're going, where we're going, where they perhaps fit in the picture, and how they can be compensated. How we can highlight that this person is the right person to take care of this, and that we've already highlighted that this needs to happen. Now we need to figure out who's going to take care of that. How much is that worth? How do we select that individual? All of this is happening at once. We've never had that before. So it's going to be a further amplification of that, more working groups, more people, more funding. As you know, everything we've done so far very much has been kind of building on the go. But as we onboard more people, as people understand this more, then we're going to be able to take a step back a little bit. The systems will continue evolving, and then we're going to be able to amplify what we're doing, because what we're doing right now is relatively small. We're not talking about a lot of money so far, but at some point to be able to amplify that so that it's bigger, more investments, larger grants, more targeted grants outside of EOS, business development on the outside of EOS. Right now, it's been very internal focused on purpose because we've got a community here that has not been able to be compensated and that has not seen its place. At some point, we're going to saturate that. Everybody who's in EOS that's got a particular skill set, either through Eden or the next iteration of Eden, through Pomelo, through the direct grants, through all the mechanisms that we have. At some point, we're going to saturate this, and then we'll be able to open the doors for people outside of the EOS. This is what's going on in the EOS. This is where we're going. Do you want to join us? This is how you can potentially fit in the picture. So we're going to see more of that over the coming 12 months.
That sounds amazing. So what kind of dollar investments then is the ENF making into the working groups? And did you say it's about 7 working groups you have operational now with 2 or 3 new ones?
We've got five operational right now. Each working group, or that's not true, not each. The 4, so the audit, core, API, and wallet, each received $250,000 US to build the white paper. And then the EVM, so the EVM Plus team is different because they're not working on a blue paper. They're working on the implementation of EVM Plus at the smart contract level, getting those work times working together. They're actually working with, we are trying to look at what Telos did as well. So we're trying to incorporate them in the mix as well, because they've done a fabulous job on Telos. And so they should be part of this as well. We've got Saeed, who won the bounty that Block.one had put out, I think 1.5 years ago at this point. He's advising that as well. So that working group is slightly different. So their contract is for $200,000. They're working on the implementation of. The other working groups are working on the, not the work itself, but on what the work is going to look like. So the blue paper itself. So when the blue papers are released at the end of January, right before Chinese New Year, I believe we're on track to releasing either 2 or 3 of the blue papers. One might be late. 2 of them started later. And so the idea was around 8 to 12 weeks runtime to be able to deploy that. They will then come up. The blue paper essentially will highlight what that roadmap is, what the options are, and what the costing options are. So then what the budget will be for that particular realm is yet to be seen. I haven't even seen it anyways. Some of the teams right now, that's what they're working on this week. So they've highlighted the items, they have an idea, they have got the options. Now it's all right, how do we budget this? How do we put numbers to that? So I can't tell you what the cost will be for those. And there's no, until we see what the options are, we also don't know which route we might want to take. So they might recommend option 1 or option 2 or something. They might recommend 6 options, but then it might be like a plug and play type of thing. It might be we recommend option 2 for now while we're working on option 3, and so it'll run in parallel. I know the API Plus, for example, as well. Let's continue running the current system while we upgrade the system, and so there's different costs to that. And so I don't know exactly what the cost will be, but I do believe that they will be significant. If we add all of those together, I do believe that we will be leveraging a lot of the funding that we currently are sitting on but are not using. because the ENF itself, in terms of operations, in terms of actual costs, is fairly low. Salary-wise, it's very low. Administrative costs, it's practically inexistent. And so the majority of the funds by far have been going into the working groups and have been going into the grants, the recognition grants that we deployed. So that's the other side of things as well. As we deploy a more formal grant framework, all we did with those $100,000 grants essentially was kind of a placeholder. We didn't have a system in place to be able to accept applications. And so that really stemmed from us. And so the idea will be, how do we now receive applications? How do we gauge which applications we will fund? At how much level? How do we keep them accountable to it? What are the milestones? Does it fit within our realm? Should it be in a different realm? How do we do all of this? That's what we're working on right now. That's essentially a working group that we're doing internally, Grant Plus, let's say. I would foresee that with the current level of funding that we have, which is, the 20 million tokens that have been earmarked for this in particular, for the ENF, when the ENF launched, it wouldn't surprise me that we use the majority of it if we really get the quality. Again, there's accountability in the system. So the idea is that when the chain launched, the block producers were making that inflation, but there was no accountability in the system. And so we saw a lot of innovation in that first year, what I call kind of the golden years of being a block producer. And EOS Nation wasn't a block producer at that time. It was always on the outside. So we never benefited from that, let's say. But there was a lot of innovation going, but there was very little accountability in the system. There was no oversight. And so people were taking extremely large salaries. They were investing in redundant tools when multiple teams were doing the same thing. Whereas now, because there's centralization within the ENF, there's a means by which we can track and see whether or not there's redundancy and link people together, be able to reduce the cost, be way more efficient with the spending. And so if the thesis is right, we should be able to see a much larger return on investment with the same amount of funds that we had seen previously, simply because we're benefiting now from hindsight, but also from the coordination of a centralized entity.
Okay, so just briefly to go back onto EVMs, Dan has said that the Ethereum virtual machine is effectively a dead end, or it's generally a poorly designed solution. So I just wondered, what are your thoughts on Dan's position on that?
I don't agree.
Okay, tell me why.
It's a really good question. So Dan and I have, when I told you earlier that we reached out to teams and asked who would potentially want to take this challenge on, one of the teams was Dan's team. Hey, would you like to do EVM? And I do believe that Dan's exact response was he doesn't see value in EVM. And so we don't agree on that. However, since then, I do believe that he's had a chat the other night with El Mato. So Matias from EOS Argentina, that essentially was given the lead on this. And I do believe that he now sees more value in EVM. So it's undeniable that in Ethereum, they've got an incredible ecosystem. They've got tons of resources, tons of libraries. The idea that Solidity was a barrier, maybe it was a barrier a long time ago, but it is no longer a barrier. It's a small barrier, and it's a barrier that's worthwhile learning, because then the doors and the possibilities open up incredibly afterwards. So you've got, by far, this is non-contested, the amount of resources available in Ethereum outweighs anything else anywhere else. So the idea of making that accessible to people is simply opening a door, a massive door with massive potential. Whether or not that turns into concrete value added, we don't know. What we do know is that not opening that door for sure does not unlock that massive potential. And so the idea of spending $200,000 in this case and a few months to build something that potentially can open a massive ecosystem, link to EOS, potential developers, applications, and businesses that see the limitations of Ethereum and want to expand on that through EOS, through the governance process that we have here. The potential upside is so high, the downside so low, that from a code point of view, you might think that it makes no sense. EOS Ethereum is outdated. It's not fast enough. From a business point of view, and this is where I don't agree with Dan, it's a missed opportunity that we did not take when that bounty was being offered. The bounty was structured in such a way that it did not complete essentially the solution, and then there was no requirement to continue on that solution and stuff. So it's just poorly structured bounty. The idea that we essentially missed a boat. We would have potentially had a lot of influx of people over the last year that we missed. We will never know. What I do know is that I'm not missing that boat again. And for the cost and the time required to do this at a smart contract level, it is worth the time. Now, if we see that nobody cares, if we see that the market doesn't react, that the narrative doesn't pick on, that nobody cares, doesn't really matter. If we do see that it somehow opens doors and that people start coming and that it brings value, then it would give justification for, let's say you take the smart contract level as MVP1 to potentially invest further resources into MVP2 and MVP3 to put it at the Node.js level so that it'd be embedded at the native level on EOS. So you don't start off with the full complete solution, but you work your way there if the market actually tells you that it's worthwhile. Not doing the first step, though, is a terrible business move. And I've said repeatedly that I'm here to operate EOS as a business. This has been, in my opinion, one of the biggest mistakes of EOS. One of the biggest downsides is that EOS has been incredibly decentralized. We were missing a centralized entity. We thought that Block.one would fill the shoes of the centralized entity, but due to various reasons, either intentional or non-intentional or circumstantial, they were not able to fill those shoes. I don't particularly care about the why. What I do care about is that we didn't have a centralized entity. We didn't have that coordination. We didn't have that funding. It wasn't in the white paper. It never came about. And we are now in a position that we do have that. And so let's not miss the boat again. This is a Hail Mary. We've got very little time. We don't have the luxury to wait around. We do have the resources. We've got the talent. We've got the skill sets. We need to do this. It's a no-brainer. So I don't agree with Dan on that, but it seems like Dan is maybe shifting his position on that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I interviewed him today. He doesn't believe in it, but he definitely said he's going to support it and he's prepared to do whatever's necessary to support the action. So he clearly believes in the business case. So I just want to spin back now to Grant Plus, which is the phrase that's definitely been coined this evening. And I think you're going to hear this a lot, and I'm sure you've heard it a lot already. I guess for people who are builders and who have created projects, they're going to want to know what type of timescale will the ENF be able to provide more grants, provide more support to projects. And you spoke about return on investment. So obviously you've got the wider return on investment, the ecosystem. I just wondered, the ENF is probably not going to take equity. So how can the ENF be self-generated? Yeah. Exactly. So how will it create a self-repeating and scalable venture capital pool, if you like, or enough resources to be able to supply these projects? And when? Because I know that people are desperate to hear that.
So first question was timeline. I would project that we should be able to start directing grants, and the likely first means by which we do so will be in the next round of Pomelo. And I believe that the idea would be that in Pomelo right now, we're providing matching funds, but we will also then be able to select certain projects that essentially do the application process. We look at their roadmap, we look at their milestones, and then we select certain projects that we believe will add value, and then we make direct contributions to them. At this point, I believe that is the likely first time. And so if the likely first time and the likely, so in terms of timeline, I believe that the next round for Pomelo is end of January, February. So in about 2 months, 2.5 months or so. It is possible that we could start accepting grant applications previous to that. I'm not saying that it will not happen, but I would say at the minimum, we should be set up for the Pomelo a portion of things. In terms of your second question, which is more on the return on investment. So and whether or not there's equity, et cetera. So the ENF is a non-for-profit, non-soliciting corporation. And so legally, the ENF cannot make any profit. Now, that does not mean that it cannot hold assets. It does not mean that it cannot make investments. If those investments bring returns, well, that would be revenue as long as there's an expense. So the non-for-profit part is that there needs to be for every in, there needs to be an out, a matching out. Ideally, at the end of the year, you're at zero, essentially. Now, through that, it doesn't mean that you can't create more revenue. You can't hold assets that potentially generate revenue, but I have no intention on doing any type of equity side of things. That's why I was so excited about Helios, was that I do believe that we need that function in the ecosystem. And Helios was positioning itself to be that venture capitalist arm side of things. And so I still think that we need that function. And I think that those entities should very much be niche in what they offer and not to try to be very broad. So instead of me trying to do 50 different things and being very poor at all of them, I'm just going to focus on public goods and try to do a really, really, really good job at doing public goods because I see that there's a hole there. So as long as we can highlight those gaps and we have entities that are very specific to that, I think that at this point, that is the much better approach because we don't have the luxury of time and we need to create competencies within those particular realms. And those competencies need to be extremely good or from a qualitative point of view, they need to be good. And so in order for that to happen rapidly, that's all they need to be doing so that they can iterate quickly. In terms of where the funding comes from, we know that the funding comes from the inflation. And so the ENF needs to be accountable to token holders. The ENF needs to showcase that what it does, it's funding public goods and that those public goods have a return on investment for all of the token holders. The ENF is accountable very much to the block producers, but is very much accountable to the wider community as well. We've seen that in the past. The community sentiment translates into the block producer sentiment. They're not completely separate. They are one in the same. The timelines might be slightly slower because people in Telegram chat much quicker. And so there's a delay or a lag, but I don't agree that there's a complete disconnect. I've been on both sides. I've been on all of the sides, and I don't agree that to be the case. Very much so as well that I believe that if the ENF is not doing a good job, the ENF should be cut off. So the ENF is the only, as far as I know, the only foundation out of all of the blockchains that wasn't appointed at launch and given a particular share of tokens. It is the only one that was appointed or that was selected through decentralization and that continuously needs to seek permission to get funded. I've also put that when we create the ENF, one of the first transactions, or basically in one of the first messages that I put as well, is that should the block producers or the token holders feel that the ENF no longer adds value to the ecosystem, that we give them preemptive authority to actually change our keys. So that should that happen, that I've already given them the okay, which then abides by the EUA and the Constitution. And so we're good on that front. I also believe that at some point, it should no longer be me. The reality, though, is that if tomorrow I get hit by a bus, ENF dies. There's nobody else in the ecosystem that I can think of that one wants to do the job.
Isn't that an unhealthy position? Isn't that an unhealthy position?
It is. It is it's an extremely difficult position. By default, I kind of get this position. That is not sustainable. That should not be the case forever. I believe that at some point it should not be me, and that should be sooner rather than later. Do we have an alternative right now? No, I don't think we do. And so we need to move towards how does the ENF eventually, I believe the ENF fulfills a particular function. So I think the function itself needs to remain, but how do we ensure that the governance process for who is in the ENF is sustainable and that there's a mechanism that we don't have yet. And so the discussions have been for the last little while that potentially the ENF is the Eden of Edens. And now with discussions that I've had with Dan, he's incorporating that into the white paper and into the roadmap that we'll be working on so that at some point the function remains, but the means by which the people enter that function or fulfill that function or fill the positions within that function, that is through a different system. That is through a different mechanism, a different governance process. But very much so, I still do believe that if I get hit by a bus tomorrow, this whole thing comes crashing down. That is not sustainable. The block producers would not trust anybody else. There's nobody else that's showcased that they'd be able to. Well, first of all, nobody wants the job. It's really not that pleasant. Okay, it's extremely difficult. All I do is work. The amount of knowledge, the amount of networking that you need to have to be able to gather the information, just reading all of the chats, knowing where we've been, to be able to make decisions and recommend decisions on where we should go. It's extremely difficult. To rebuild that again will take time. So we need to create the processes for that to happen again. But really, realistically, the other people that potentially could fill this position are no longer in EOS. They're gone. And so by default, I kind of get this position. And so that's kind of the other side of the question that you asked. So that the inflation comes in, there's accountability, and ultimately then there's accountability from within the ENF as well, as to how who is in the ENF and how that they're accountable to the larger token holders. I very much believe that at some point, and I still believe this, that EOS, I would love to be able to see that there's 10,000 people, 100,000 people, 200,000 people that are participating on this side of things, that gives counterweight to the token weight type of thing. Right now, it's just not big enough. It's just, the balance is not right. It is not true that 15 people who paid 10 EOS are equivalent to people who are holding 200 million EOS. That's not the case. However, those 200 million EOS or so that are holding, they agree with that as well. So they're funding a means by which this can rebalance so that there can be two completely different side of things. One are the infrastructure providers that do their job extremely well. They provide the infrastructure, they secure the chain, they're the token holders, and so they ultimately make the final decision type of thing. However, who makes those recommendations? Who decides where we should go from a policy point of view, from a political point of view, from a business point of view? That should be abstracted away from them and be put in another organization. In between, you would have the ENF. The Edens or Edens of the Edens would kind of fill this role so that there's enough weight behind these people. So it doesn't need to be token weight, but there's weight, there's time, there's people, there's a lot of weight, that's undeniable weight, that then makes the recommendation to the block producers and said, I think we should do blue instead of red. This is why I think I should do so. And look, I've got 100,000 people behind me that also agree to that. So ultimately, that's where I want to go. That's where, from what I understand, that's where Dan wants to go as well. And we're trying to make that come to light by working together and putting that pen to paper so that everybody can participate in this. And essentially, again, another thing, another roadmap of here's where we want to go. Here's how you can be a part of that.
So you mentioned Dan's white paper a few times, and Dan mentioned it today. And my understanding is you might be helping him out a little bit with that, or you're certainly working together more than you were previously. So I just wondered, what's to come next then from EOS, given that you're working so closely with Dan, we have Pomelo, we have all of these exciting inventions with Eden and the new Federation of Edens even. So I just wondered, what can we expect from 2022 then with your great minds all working together?
The way that I've been putting it to Dan, Dan historically, for those who have followed Dan, created BitShares. That really doesn't work out. He wants to get funded by the chain, and I'll fast forward, so I'm really giving a TLDR on this. He wants to get funded by the chain for whatever reason. Market cap is too small. Perhaps he wants to get funded too much. Perhaps the community doesn't want to fund him. Whatever, he has to leave. Creates a new ICO. Creates Steemit. Partners with Ned. That doesn't work out, breaks up. He's kind of kicked out of the community to a certain degree from a token point of view. And so he needs to now create EOS. He learns from the past. He leaves Block.one, and there's this opportunity for the first time where he's no longer held by the corporate structure of the company or the entity that launched a chain, but he has the possibility of potentially being funded by the chain itself instead of going off and creating a new ICO with a new project and a new blockchain. Now, in order to do this, this would be the first time and the first blockchain that I know of, but I might be wrong with this. I haven't done the research. I believe it's the first time where a blockchain is created by the blockchain, funded by the blockchain. So the transition period of the current protocol that we have, or the current consensus mechanism, which is a delegated proof of stake, at some point, How long that will take, I'm not sure. It will likely take a couple of years before we make a full transition, before all the code is transitioned over, before there's enough people, before that balance is now right for the, whatever you'll call this event where the actual event happens. That will take time. But once that happens, you're going to have a completely new code running on the blockchain that was funded by the blockchain to do so. And there's going to be essentially a transfer of consensus mechanism that occurs within the blockchain itself while the blockchain is running. I don't think we've ever seen that before. Ethereum has been talking about switching over to proof of stake for a very long time, but if I'm not mistaken, that's a kind of a different chain, and at some point they'll link, whereas this is going to be an application on EOS that essentially over a period of time just gains more power, gains more weight, and the powers that be relegate that authority. And essentially it just happens like flawlessly type of thing. So I think that with Dan's white paper, laying out that vision with then community feedback over this period of time, and you've seen it in the last couple of days as well, Dan is very much active like he was in the ICO days of EOS. And that's what we've been missing as well. The majority of the token holders came here for Dan. What Dan's been able to do by just talking to people unchained, just being able to be Dan, we only see that during ICOs, because after the ICO, he's always stuck in a corporate structure, but he no longer needs a corporate structure because the chain itself has enough market cap and enough liquidity to be able to potentially make the decision as to whether or not they want to fund this application, essentially Eden 2.0. So that he doesn't need to go do another ICO, and we can kind of get the best of both worlds. We've never had that opportunity before. So 2022, in a way, is EOS reinventing itself through a new white paper, through a new direction, through a new business model, but on EOS. It's Dan eating his dog food for the first time, funded by the chain itself. That's where I think this is where we're going.
I think Dan described it as changing the engine of the car while driving 100 miles an hour on the freeway. So
yeah,
congratulations.
And we've done that, right? EOS is capable of doing that. That's one of the benefits of EOS. We've done it repeatedly. We've done it over and over and over. This will be, though, on a level that we haven't done before, where it requires a lot of people, because one of the thresholds will be the amount of people that are in the community. So that there's a weight that you can't deny, that if there's 100,000 people in Edens and all those are unique people, regardless of their token weight, the sheer amount of people has a weight. And then the value that ideally they'll be producing will also be very much undeniable. But that governance mechanism switch, or that consensus mechanism switch of that magnitude, that we've never done before. We've changed code on the fly. We've updated on the fly repeatedly over and over. But this side of things, we've never done before. And as far as I know, nobody's ever done before.
So then, do you agree with Dan then that EOS is potentially the DAO of all DAOs?
I believe EOS has always been a DAO. I think it started being coined more recently, but essentially the top 21 block producers are a DAO. It's the token holders that vote the block producers. Block producers are essentially just the largest mining pools. In POW, you have mining pools. You send your hash power to a particular mining pool, and that grows the mining pool. Well, in EOS, the tokens and the delegation or the staking of tokens is essentially like giving your hash power to particular entities. And so the top 21 block producers are the largest mining pools.
Basically, I want to talk a little bit about interruptibility. So let's try and broaden this out a little bit. So how can the ENF facilitate more cross-chain interruptibility? And I wonder, what are your plans to make the most out of the unique and exceptionally talented talent pool we have in our side of Sister Change? How can we maximize that and maybe bring some of that talent back into the main net?
So all of us share a common code base. So I don't call them sister chains. At this point, they're all EOS.io iterations. There's not one that's better than the other. There's not one that's above the other. They're all different. They've all decided to go in a direction which they believe created value or creates value. The current iteration that has the EOS token as well. And so all of them coming together is extremely difficult, because part of why they separated, or part of why they all went different ways, was because they didn't agree with core fundamentals oftentimes. And we've seen that, especially in the branding side of things, a lot of other EOS.io iterations have very much proactively shied away from mentioning that they're even an EOS.io iteration. They try to drop that. Again, going back to what I said earlier in the call or in the interview, that there was a certain weight that comes with the name EOS. And I think that that still exists. And I think that part of that healing process for the greater ecosystem just started happening with essentially the divorce with Block.one. And so what we're seeing is the chains now come together, start having discussions. We've got this EOS.io Plus working group that I've mentioned earlier, that will likely, one of the first things that they'll be doing is figuring out whether or not they want to work together, coming up likely with a rebrand of EOS.io. So if it wasn't EOS.io, so if we still had the same token, because that's kind of complex to change, it's a lot of, it's not necessarily that it's difficult, but it's quite complex. And so likely we keep the EOS token, the ticker itself, the EOS token itself, we keep that. But if we no longer refer to it as EOS.io, or if we no longer refer to it as, right now people call it the EOS mainnet, if there was a different name, let's say it was Michael.io or whatever it was, and it was the Michael chain, then all the EOS.io iterations as they exist would no longer have EOS to their name. They would have all come to an agreement on, we want to call it Michael.io because that makes more sense. Or maybe there's no IO, so it's just called Michael. It's the Michael software stack. That would go a long way to start building the bridges and start mending the basically the relationships that have been broken for whatever various reasons over the last couple of years. And I believe that the ENF plays a significant role in that, because the ENF does have a lot of funding compared to other chains. EOS, the chain that has the token EOS, is definitely by far the one with the largest market cap and the most amount of liquidity. And so if one thing that the ENF can do is coordinate that liquidity to lay the first olive branch, and that's already happening, so that people come back together and we start the healing process so that we can work together as one. It doesn't matter who did what, when, how in the past. How do we move forward is the only thing that we have control over. We cannot change what happened. All we can decide is where we go forward. And if that means that it's not the ENF, if that means that it's another entity, if that means that some chains decide that it's not in their best interest to join this group that's forming, that's okay too. Right now, the discussions are very much open about, should we? If we did, what would that look like? What would everybody's role play? How are we going to be taking care of code base? Block.one hasn't been taking care of code base for a very long time. Like I mentioned earlier, there's two different things: system contracts and then Node.js. Node.js is the one thing that we all have in common. System contracts, that's really the flavor that every chain has, kind of their own type of, in general, that's really more unique to them. So most likely every chain will still have their own system contract core developers that works on their particular flavor of iteration of Michael.io. But Michael.io, all the resources potentially would be pooled together to determine what goes in next. All right, in 3 months, now maybe we have the London upgrade. 3 months after that, we've got the Barcelona upgrade. 3 months after that, we've got the Moscow upgrade. Whatever it is, likely if we pool resources, we have way more resources in terms of talent development, because these other iterations have tremendous talent in them. A lot of the talent left EOS. They went to other chains because that was a way for them to survive. And so bringing all of that back, where people can contribute different types of resources, whether it be financial or whether it be development, quality development, engineering ideas, whether it be architectural, there's so many things that we can, that people can contribute that really make, or that really will be key to making that Michael.io or whatever it's called. That's the part that we're trying to see whether or not there's common grounds. And so far, it seems like that's the case.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about the EOS Network Foundation's new branding, or your identity now. You finally got your identity. And I know that means a lot to you to have a clear break from the past and have your own identity, your own kind of presence. So could you, by the way, it looks incredible. Could you tell us a little bit about the inspiration behind the new branding, and just a little bit behind what you wanted to achieve with this new look, and also this new tone of voice as well?
So when we started, when we first launched the ENF, we knew that one of the things that we would need, first of all, is obviously to choose a name, but that we would need to choose a look and a feel that would highlight who we were, who we came from, and where we wanted to go. And so we partnered and we hired a branding agency, a global branding agency, that really walked through us over the last 3 months or so, walked through us a process of finding out and really highlighting it and putting on paper what our identity was and how we would position that in relation to other foundations, but what was unique about our circumstance. And they were also apprised of the potential breakup with Block.one. Again, if we go back to the previous conversation we had, that idea that we were going to be breaking up with Block.one was very much in the talks now for a very long time. And so we mentioned that to them. Here's where we come from. Here's the reality of where we are today. Here's how the ENF got formed. Here are the competitors in the ecosystem. So they did an environmental scan of the other foundations across the blockchain space. How are they positioned? How did they come about? How are they funded? What's good about them? What do you like less about them? What kind of tone do you want to take? What kind of look do you want, or what do you want people to feel when they see the brand, when they associate with the brand? And so we're talking about hours and hours of conversations with professionals within that space that were essentially able to, we did a big brain dump on them. Fortunately, they'd been working in the crypto space before, so they had an idea of what crypto was, et cetera, right? They had heard as well about EOS. One of the first calls we ever had with them, and this was extremely difficult. A lot of the companies that we reached out to at the onset did not want to work with EOS. They did not want to be associated with EOS. They didn't even want to put on their client list that maybe EOS was a client of theirs, right? And so this branding agency, if I'm not mistaken, Zach reached out to more than 10 that he applied. Some of them were just a kind of a submission form on the internet, on a web page. But it was really difficult to find somebody who wanted to work with us. And this is not just for a branding agency. This is for marketing. This is for other components of our business as well, accounting, other things that we've had to deal with. Is the very, very real branding that EOS had and that we're trying to move away from. So we also had those very real discussions with them, and they brought it up very much early at the onset. EOS is a scam. We're not sure we want to be associated to you. Why do you think EOS is a scam? Well, you guys received $4.1 billion and you guys didn't do anything with it. Your chain is shit. All right, let's put that in position. So I didn't get $4.1 billion. Not sure about the rest of the EOS community, but pretty sure they didn't get $4.1 billion. Pretty sure that money is still within this entity over there. And so kind of walking through that with them, and then ultimately getting to the first product that they delivered, which was a voice. It was a general vision behind what the ENF could represent and what kind of emotion it would invoke, or what kind of emotion they recommended that it, essentially the ENF invoke, based on all of that history that they were at that point very much apprised of, knowing where we came from, and then trying to position us where we want to go, and making sure that that brand highlighted that or facilitated it or amplified that. And so that's what you've seen it, but that's what people will see in the branding that is being released either tonight or tomorrow. That was the first iteration. And the second iteration was, all right, logo, colors, typography, fonts, general look, etc. And so I'm really happy with the product that they delivered. This is 3 months, 3.5 months almost, or yeah, 3 months of back and forth with professionals in the space that have really created something that I think will help us move towards that future, recognizing where we come from, and also placing us very much in competition and in the same league, or from a branding point of view, as other foundations within this space, so that we don't look dinky. This is the quality of the work itself is really good, that it's apparent that there's been a lot of time and work and effort and subject matter expertise put into this, so that it positions EOS as, you know, something of value, that the old EOS is not the new EOS, and the new EOS is serious and is ready to play ball. That's the idea.